Welcome to the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. I am Roniel,
I am DaRon.
and in today's show, we're going to talk about the different fields in the industry, and how they rank. Um, how would you rank those fields in the industry? And why, from the highest to the lowest, or the hardest to the easiest? Why would you say that either one is harder or easy, or rank lower on that scale? So, if you wouldn't mind giving us a brief overview of why you think, or your observation of what you think are the top in the field.
Sure. So I guess let's start off by defining the different fields. I'm going to break it down actually into 6 different groups. So we have incident response, physical security comes next. Then we have network and system security, digital forensics, cryptology, and application security. All right. The reason why I'm breaking it down that way, and you'll notice actually really importantly, I separated incident response from digital forensics, is because I'm separating them based on skill sets, education, barriers to entry, and things of that nature. So when we talk about how hard it is, how difficult something is, I prefer to take a look at, number one, barriers to entry. So how hard is it to get into that field in the first place, professionally and otherwise, right? And then I like to talk about, like I said, how much experience do you have to have? How many other things you need to bring into the mix? And what kind of education or certification, knowledge do you have to have along with all of that, right? So if we were to be ranking them, my opinion is I'd set incident response as actually the easiest, period. Easier than, for example, physical security. And the reason why I say that is very simply with physical security, you have a lot of personnel who are law enforcement, former law enforcement, military personnel. We, of course, have a glut of military personnel having been through 20 years of war. But we also have a large number of current and former law enforcement. What that means is physical security in general has an artificial barrier to entry. And that artificial barrier to entry is being caused just by the sheer number of individuals who can participate in that, who have experience elsewhere. Like I said, again, police. A lot of police officers, in order to get a little extra money, be it for Christmas, birthdays, whatever it happens to be, they will work physical security jobs. You'll see a lot of military personnel, be they infantry or your military police and things of that nature, who also will go through, and as a secondary part-time job, they'll pick up a physical security position. And what that means is, if you, someone with just, for example, a high school education, wanted to go through and you wanted to do physical security, it can be considerably more difficult, especially if you are in an area that is near a military base, or that has or has had a large police force, right? So there's nothing necessarily particularly complex, depending on what it is you're doing for physical security. Not if you're the person who's patrolling. But physical security, if we talk about it in the greater context, beyond just the individual who's doing patrols or actively guarding something, is actually very complicated. Understanding how fences, for example, operate, how they can be subverted, the best way to have your barbed wire, and common mistakes that are made tied to that. What kind of fencing you need. There is a lot that goes into that people don't ever think about or talk about. But that side actually can be complicated, or at least more complicated than I think a lot of people give it credit. So incident response, on the other hand, as I said earlier, to me is easier. So I don't know what your your experiences are, but what I've generally seen from the incident response realm is that is, like physical security, oftentimes considered more of an entry-level position, right? You usually don't have any real education requirements, any real certification requirements or anything like that. The task work isn't particularly difficult. It's actually fairly straightforward. And for anything that's complicated, they just pick it up, literally, not even image it, just pick it up and take it over to the digital forensics expert, right? Whereas if, for example, it were something simple, well, what they're going to do is they'll just take an image, and it can be an image of, in memory. It can be a live image that's capturing the hard drive because for whatever reason you can't shut it down, or it can be an offline image where you're yanking the drives or not, and just sucking all the data down from there. It doesn't really actually change anything much, because for the most part, if you've ever worked incident response or worked with them, they're using stuff like in-case, FTK, stuff like that, that just, you put the drive in, you hit a button, put in the other drive, and away it goes, kind of deal. It clones it auto-magically, life is good. Maybe you're doing it a little more manually. My preference actually is to do it more manually. I have my own setup when I do that kind of thing. But again, that side of it is not complicated. I'll tell you, incident response is not what most people think it is. Most people confuse and conflate digital forensics and incident response, right? And there is a big difference.
So why do you think, not to cut you off, but why do you think that that they mix the two? Because from my experience, when you either see an incident response course or you hear you get training from people who are incident responders, the perception is that you're somewhat like a digital forensic expert, which we know, me and you both know that's not the truth, but right. They kind of go through that and they give you that. And I don't know if they're doing it because they want to make it look interesting and get more people into it and get your money's worth for it, like the training. But I really don't understand, that. And if it's that easy, which of course I've seen, it seems like it's easier to get in, but I don't understand why they're doing that, because that makes it confusing for somebody who, that doesn't understand what an incident responder really is.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. So I'll tell you the difference between the two real quickly. Well, I know you know it, but just for the general audience, you could equate the two as being the difference between an EMT, so a paramedic, and a surgeon. And I've actually made that comparison before, right? So I think what so many people have in their mind is, so the ambulance comes in, the paramedic comes out, they are actively on the scene, they apply pressure, they pull out the tourniquet, they're sitting there, stopping the hemorrhaging, they're doing all this stuff. They're stuffing the wound with gauze and taping you up, and then they slam you into that ambulance. Joking, of course. And get the IV going, all that good stuff. And so you're watching it and you don't know better. I mean, that's like 90% surgeon right there, right? I mean, you saw them, they did stuff. Maybe a scalpel came out, probably not, but maybe a scalpel or something scalpel-like came out. You're seeing the scissors, right? So they use those scissors that'll cut off your clothes, any article of clothing or anything that's in the way. and it actually behooves EMTs to play up that mysticism a little bit, because in the case of EMTs, they're actually, a lot of them are grossly underpaid considering what they do. In the digital forensics and incident response field, you see something very similar. So your incident responders, it's that magic. Because people don't understand it, they don't know what's going on. To them, I mean, it's just, wow, it's so much stuff, and it just seems like it's so technically involved, and all this other stuff. And so what they wind up doing is they get this false perception that the two are equivalent, and it behooves and benefits your your incident responders to pretend like they're the same when they're not. The skill set of a digital forensics is more like the skill set of a surgeon. If you're talking the disparities between the skill sets of the two, that EMT's skill set and knowledge, and this is, again, not to disparage them, they're necessary positions. They do great things. They do fantastic things. I do incident response. I also do digital forensics. Most people don't do both, but being a contractor, I get to do anything I want, really. But I get to do a lot of things as a result. And the amount of schooling and the amount of technical skill you have to have is just completely different. But for that incident response person, in order to justify the $230, $300, $400 price tag for imaging your phone or imaging your computer, what do they have to do? They have to market themselves like they're doing this phenomenally difficult thing, when the truth is you could go through right here, right now, in almost no training and almost no time, make an image of anyone's hard drive. And I obviously you're technical, so, but by you, I mean the general audience. It's easy. It's trivial. There's a lot of software that will do it, and it'll do it for free. I mean, DD or CAT, you don't even have to use DD. DD is a Linux command line tool, and a lot of people get real freaked out when they see it, because you have IF, which is, of course, your input file, OF, which is output file, and then you've got, your block size, which is BS. I know. Stuff like that, and people get, their eyes, this is too much. Well, a CAT is simply, I want to make an image of your hard drive. Simple. CAT, /dev/SDA, and then I pump it over to some file, and there's my image. It's ridiculously easy. But you can't then go through and say, well, I'm going to charge you $900. I'm going to charge you $200, $300, $400 for this, if people actually knew how easy it was. No one would pay for it. So I think they purposely make it seem like it's more than it is. And they want to, look, we all want people to think we do great things, right? We've all seen the memes, what I think, what my parents think I do, what my spouse thinks I do, what my kids think I do. It's the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing, and it really benefits them. But you'll notice the pay difference from a corporate perspective is actually completely, utterly, totally different. Your digital forensics guys get paid a lot more than your incident responders. So, just, when they bill you.
Yeah.
But would you go to a class for an incident response, if you knew the content in it was going to be ridiculously simple stuff, where you're running CAT or DD or, pull up FTK Imager or whatever it happens to be? I wouldn't, and I wouldn't pay several $1,000s, which is how much those courses cost. I would not pay that much money for something like that.
Here's the problem with that particular thing, because I have actually took a course. I won't say where it was from, but I'll just say that I took a course. And
did you demand your money back?
Luckily, it wasn't $1,000. But I've already knew a lot of the stuff that they were teaching, because I've done some of the stuff, and plus, it reminds me of a mixture of threat hunting, a little bit of maybe some malware analysis, if we're going from a malware perspective, because it really was about tracking down like ransomware per se, and seeing what it was doing and blah blah blah, and then using the FTK tool, Imager, stuff like that, just using a few things. But this guy was an incident responder, okay, and my thing was, it was just like, all right, this seems more like digital forensics. Now, I know a lot about digital forensics. Doesn't mean per se that I will ever say that I'm a digital forensics expert, but I know a lot about it at least. But I was just like, this seems like it's a mixture of the two. And my problem with it is, you're. It may be fun to just teach people different things, make it interesting. But if people are trying to get into this field,
Yeah.
then you're giving them that false perception, which
Yeah.
gives them also false hope. When they go say, "Hey, I want to be an incident responder," they find out, one, that it's not a lot of money in it, because it's not that hard to do, and then they found out, two, that they're not going to be doing the things that they thought they were training on, which is very depressing and disturbing, by the way.
Yeah.
And why would it make you want to actually do something that it's really easy to do, and you're not doing the stuff you think that you're going to do like a digital forensics expert would. But that just tells you there are different levels to the field, and maybe that's a good entry level start for somebody who wants to become a digital forensic professional or something like that. You got to start somewhere, but I just think that people should stop with the gimmicks, the money grabbing, and all of that. Like, come on now, like it's not that serious, all right?
Yeah. You're right. And it's actually funny because I don't want to call it a scam because I'll get sued. But seriously, it has a lot of similarities with what you see from these colleges. I'm sure, remember actually having had your own experiences with it, but all of these people going through and suing all of these different colleges for false expectations and for really false advertisement, saying, okay, well, if you get this degree in XYZ, you're going to make huge money and there will be jobs all over the place and our name really carries weight, kind of deal. And then you go and you take the classes and they're not great. You walk away going, I'm not sure I learned anything. And you spent huge money, you spent huge amount of time, and you can't find a job, or all the jobs don't pay well, and now you've got 100,000, whatever it is, dollars worth of debt. What do you have to say for it? This is the same general thing. It's the same thing, at least to me, from a moral perspective. The equivalencies are strong with this one.
Yeah. No, I understand.
So, I guess moving on, the next thing I would say is your network and system security are both relatively equivalent as far as barriers to entry and difficulty is concerned. I would say network security is actually a little easier. So the scanners are much more mature. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I remember way back when we used to have, you'd grab whatever the config file is for whatever it is you wanted to scan, and they had all kinds of scanners that would just look at that configuration file, and then they would tell you vulnerabilities based on what it sees in that configuration file. And of course, everyone's been imitating Cisco forever because they're the dominant networking equipment manufacturer these days and have been for 25, 30 years easily. Who else are you going to buy? It's going to be Cisco, especially if it's a router or a switch. Now, their firewalls don't impress me at all. Let's put it that way. I'll take a Juniper over Cisco all day, every day.
Right.
But they make huge money doing that. But what that has meant is everyone's going off and they copy Cisco. Everyone copies Cisco. Everything is an imitation of the CatOS or iOS. Cisco, of course, having iOS long before Macintosh, I should say Apple, went through and stole it. I'm actually surprised there haven't been more lawsuits over that. I don't know about you.
Yeah. No, it was actually as when I was learning about the stuff back then. it was kind of confusing. What's the difference? So I was like, yeah, but I knew that Cisco had this first because I remember, when I was learning about the Cisco OS, the OS system they use for their, their switches and different things, and I'm like, oh, okay, you got the iOS stuff, and then here comes Apple, and you're like, okay, is that the same?
Yeah.
A little confused.
They're using Cisco's operating system? Why?
Right, yeah.
This isn't a router. What are these guys,
Yeah,
crazy?
yeah. No, it's. I guess the terms always kind of, you get the same similar terms. Doesn't mean they mean the same, but you always get the similar terms in this field.
Well, once you make the whole everything popular, I mean, it's almost obligatory, right?
Yep.
Anyway, so yeah, with networking and system security, their tool set is incredibly mature. Incredibly mature. You can go through and you can run tons of scanners. You can run Big Fix or any host of different tools against it. Shoot, even Nessus got involved and decided to move into that realm for whatever reason. But Retina, you name a tool, they've been around for a long time, a very long time, and they're very good at scanning operating systems, especially with credentialed scans, or networking equipment, again, especially with credentialed scans, and finding vulnerabilities and having few false positives. With your Linux systems, it's a little more complicated. You're more likely to get much more false positives, but in many corporate environments, those are your servers, and for whatever reason, no one cares about servers. I don't know why. Especially,
they're very important.
Yeah, they're very important.
Yeah, and they hold a lot of secrets.
They hold a lot of secrets. See, and I think that's part of the reason is most people, if you're talking email servers, it's going to be Microsoft because they're going to use Exchange. If you're talking like authentication, now you're talking Active Directory. So again, I mean, it's going to be Microsoft. And then really Linux, they reserve for, I'm going to say, your miscellaneous stuff. So it's going to be more your web servers. It's going to be, if you're doing some kind of virtual machines, it could be your host as well, and so on and so forth. So since it's not your email server, it's not your VPN server, a lot of those tend to be either, software based, or it's Microsoft's running off Microsoft's VPN pool, stuff like that. Nobody cares. Oh, well, it's your file server. Well, usually your file server is going to be Windows, unless you're talking about, again, a web server or something like that environment. And so it seems like Linux gets thrown to the wolves with regard to security. Plus, there's that bogus lie that your Unix systems and Unix-like systems don't get viruses. Well, Apple doesn't get viruses. I remember those commercials. They were a lie back then, and they're a lie now. And there are viruses for Apple. There are viruses for Linux. There are viruses for FreeBSD. There are, worms, Trojans, ransomware exists for them too. The only reason why you don't see more is because if you're organized crime, who do you want to go after? 95% of active users, because it's easier to fool someone to run an application. Or do you want to go after the 5% of active users who aren't Windows? I don't know about you, but if I'm trying to make money, I'm going to go after the big dogs and take on the 95%. Because if only 5% of those guys click on it, I still make huge money. If 5% of the 5% click on it, I make nothing.
And then you got to think about it, like, I mean, and you probably already said this, but a lot of the people, the vast majority of the people around the world are not very technical.
Right.
And Linux takes a lot. Now, Of course, they've gotten better trying to, basically persuade those users or tend to those people. But majority of the our culture or just the world in general, they they prefer Windows because
Yeah.
it's easier graphical interface, even though it's not good. They prefer that. So yes, if it, as an attacker or a malware developer or whatever, you're gonna go for that. You're gonna make a ton of more money, and then that there's always vulnerabilities there, and then users are easily and susceptible to attacks or clicking on anything. So, and with Linux, like you said, it's not that it's it's they can't get any
Right.
viruses or any malware. It's just that there's not many people using them and nobody's being targeted. But
Right.
there are definitely tons of malware out there for them.
Right.
They're not excluded. They're not that special.
Right. That's exactly right. I mean, basically, if you want to get a workstation, if you want to attack a workstation, it's most likely going to be Windows. Go for it. If you want to attack a server, most servers are Linux. So what are you going to do? You're going to make a worm for a server because most sysadmins aren't foolish enough to browse the web and retrieve their email and that kind of stuff. So you're more likely to see a worm on Linux, and you're more likely to see a virus on Windows. Just how that works. It's because a virus requires your user to go through and actively do something, and your worm doesn't. You will see worms for Windows, but there are a lot fewer of them relative to Linux, and it's really based on how the operating system tends to get used. And Apple just is not that big of a market. They have stuff, but relative to the malware market, I mean, why would you put all your resources into that? What you will see for Apple is, thanks to iPhones and such, you'll see a lot of malware that's designed to turn them into a part of a botnet, stuff like that. You'll see malware that wipes them. You'll see some spyware, things of that nature, but this is all really based on market share and how things are used. That dictates what kind of malware you are generally going to see. But it's honestly a travesty that you have all of these people running around still to this day saying, oh, well, my Macintosh can't get malware. Your Macintosh can get malware. You need to have something on there to scan for that. And the same is true with your Linux server, your Linux workstation, your Unix server, your Unix. Not many people use Unix, but whatever, especially with HPUX being gone, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so system security in general and network security, usually they require or they will ask for either education or years maybe as a system administrator or a network administrator, depending on which one you're doing. They may require a degree, a relevant degree. They don't do that as much as they used to. And so you see that quality actually going down. And a lot of that happens to come from the fact that a lot of these servers now, plenty of people would tell me it's such a great thing, but a lot of these servers now are ridiculously easy to install, get everything set up, and then you walk away and you don't touch it. And if there's ever a problem, rather than troubleshoot, you reinstall. And you've lost a lot of that skill that used to exist in, okay, well, I need to go through and I need to know all my tools. I need to know when to check, dmessage or, LSOF or whatever based on what it is I'm seeing. I need to know how to go through and hack the kernel and recompile it or whatever it is I need to do. I need to be able to do the same thing with my drivers in order to get them to work. Yes, it's great. It's great because it saves a lot of time now. But at the same time, you've seen that rollback of necessary precursor skills. And what it means is you also see a lot of system administrators who really just aren't good at their job because they can't troubleshoot when there are issues. They don't know how to. I have seen that a lot. I actually recently was doing an engagement. We came in, this system had been horribly compromised by the Chinese. We came in and we're doing our thing. Well, the system administrator didn't even know how to authenticate to his own server. He had no clue. And it's not because he got locked out. He just had no clue. What do you
What?
do?
What?
Yeah, you're
Like, how did
you're trying to figure out what he does. I'm trying to
like
figure out what he does.
how did he get his job again?
I have no clue. It's so bad. It's so bad. But that's actually, I see more and more of that kind of stuff now than what I used to see. It used to be, excuse me, if your administrator didn't work in the command line, and it didn't matter if they were Windows or if they were Linux or whatever, but if they didn't work in the command line at least, 10% of the time, you knew they were doing something wrong. But now is if they open up the command line, everyone starts to question their sanity. The truth is that's actually faster and easier and more accurate in a lot of ways, especially because even to this day, I still see dissonance between what you see in the graphical user interface and what actually gets written to configuration files or, the registry or what have you. And so you have to know how to find all of this stuff in the command line, and you have to know how to work it. And if you don't, then you're not doing your job. But that's our industry today. So, and then on the networking side, actually, things have gotten even easier because more and more they're pushing to centrally manage all your networking equipment. So being a network administrator is much easier than it used to be. You don't have to manage 2,000 different configuration files. And you don't have to manually set up all your route tables and everything else and manage those across the individual nodes, which you used to have to do. Now it's all done auto-magically and is done through a single terminal, a single interface. They have GUIs on networking equipment now. I don't know if you've seen that, but they have actually feels like, I think they started maybe 2007. They started doing like a web interface for it, and now they've made them more and more intricate. Cisco had some stuff before that, but it was always very bad. It was very bad, very rudimentary. It's much more advanced. Now you don't need to know any of the commands for most of your job. And like I said, you can manage all of it in a single system now.
Yeah, but you know what? Now that takes me, and I'm sure we're going to get to this. But when they start adding these extra things, you start adding more vulnerabilities, more
Definitely.
issues. And now that goes to, I'm sure that you're going to get to your number one.
Yes.
Where comes the number one aspect that makes it even more intricate, more interesting.
Well, and that's exactly right. So as we move forward, I would say, so your number 3 would be digital forensics. So digital forensics, you have to have experience. I'm sorry, if you don't have experience, and I mean a fair bit of experience, and it needs to be in a diverse set of things. So if, for example, you've never administered a system, then it's going to be very difficult to do digital forensics properly on a server or on a whole host of other devices. If you have never gone through and been a network admin and you don't have that knowledge, then it becomes much harder to deal with a compromise that involves networking devices or that involves the internet. You don't even have to talk about, routing tables and all this other stuff. If you don't understand how to trace through all of this data and know, first and foremost, what most attackers do, then you're going to be hosed. And if you don't know all the different tools that you need to have and to use in order to track someone down who did something via the network, it's considerably more difficult and your results will be very bad. Please.
No, and I'll let you finish. But it goes to one thing. And now that you were talking about the skill set you need to know or at least have done. But a lot of times I see digital forensic experts who maybe they have a system administration background, okay, but let's say that they have that, but they don't understand hackers.
Right.
They don't know what they do, like I don't get it because I don't understand how you can do it and not understand what the hell you're doing on that end, how they do what they do, what they're doing, what techniques they're doing,
Right.
or looking for, goes back to, not only having that, but you at least have to have an understanding of what hackers do, have that mindset in general. You still have to have that mindset. So it makes it even harder because you have to have that mindset from not only a blue team on how you may fix things, but also how they offensively do those things, which makes you more valuable. Because now you have that understanding. But you have a lot of forensic experts who don't even know that. So how the hell do they know what they're looking for?
Yeah, well, you're actually exactly right. And that does pose a real problem. So, like you said, you have to understand the way the other side thinks. How are you going to do any of this if you don't understand how they think? This is actually one of my biggest complaints about the white hat community in general is they sit there and they're like, oh, well, we secure all these systems and all this other stuff. And I have to be honest, I've never found a white hat I liked. Never. Nor have I found one who was ever competent. They don't understand the enemy. If you don't understand the enemy, how in the world are you going to protect against them? You don't know what it is they do. You don't know how they operate. You have no clue about any of the necessary information that you have to have in order to make proper and educated decisions. You're hunting in the dark. You're securing in the dark, as the case may be. To sit there and have that mentality of do no evil and I'm a goody two shoes, which is how they come off. First of all, honestly, it's insulting. But secondly, it's beyond willful ignorance. You're literally making yourself stupid, which would be the definition of the thing. You're making yourself stupid, and for what purpose? If you don't understand how malware works, how do you protect against it? If you don't understand how malware developers write what they write and why, what is their motivation? How are you going to do anything? You're going to be lost in the woods. You would be better if I stuck you out in the middle of the forest at night, barefoot and naked, with nothing, and tell you to get home. You'd do better. Your chances of actually successfully completing your mission would be far greater. But, please.
Sorry, just to piggyback off of that, with the white hat term, before we continue to go on, how do you see that? Now, everybody brings his white hat, and I'm starting to see that the white hat hackers, or white hat in general, are becoming a joke.
Yeah.
People are making jokes off of it. And I don't know if you've seen my post on LinkedIn where somebody had posted a picture of the white hat hacker, the black hat, and the gray hat with the dragon and stuff. So it's kind of funny that they're making this term that it's not even cool to be a white hat hacker. And then if that's the case, who is considered in that group?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we talking blue teamers? Are we talking about the digital forensics expert? Are we talking about some of these people, not just the pen testers? Because everybody thinks that, if you're a pen tester, you're this white hat hacker and blah, blah, blah. All right. Do you consider all of those in those groups to be a white hat? And is it becoming a thing where white hat hackers are considered your modern day script kiddies?
I think they've always been script kiddies.
Okay.
Please.
And that's great. I really wanted to know that because back in the days, and this is where it gets kind of crazy because there was no term of black hat, gray hat, white hat, and all this other foolish shit. You're just a hacker. You're either a hacker or you're not, whatever. All right. So you get all of these different terms, and if script kiddies have always been that, and they're now the white hat hackers, which I do agree with you because as we go further, I'm going to say some stories that were pretty damaging for me coming up as an aspiring hacker and trying to get into the field. But if that's the case, this is really, really bad for the industry because you have script kiddies becoming white hat hackers and making up these false narratives or false things that are not even actually real because they don't know anything truly about what really goes on and that space.
Yeah.
So it's kind of general. I would like to know your thoughts on, is that since they already always been that, do you consider a lot of the people in the field as in that group?
Yes, I definitely think most people are white hats who are in security. And I definitely think most of the people who are in security are incompetent, honestly. If we're really going to be honest here, brutally honest, I'm going to be brutally honest. Most of the people in our industry have no business in the industry. And, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate for that. But all you have to do is look at the number of compromises there are. And most of the compromises that occur are for ridiculous reasons. It's incompetence. It's utter incompetence is what it is. There is absolutely positively no good reason for you to have your Git credentials in your Git repo. That is so bad. It's not funny, SolarWinds. I don't understand why you have all these incidents occurring. So I have been managing and securing systems for the U.S. military, the U.S. government, a lot of international organizations, and so on and so forth for what is over 2 decades now. It's going to be 21 years here in May. So I can tell you the vast majority of breaches occur because of multiple failures, not one failure. It's never one. It's never one. I don't care who you think you are. It's never one. It's always a whole bunch of failures down a chain that then allowed that thing to occur. And a big part of the issue is you have all these script kiddie white hat people running around and they're saying, well, you can do no evil, you can't play, you can't do any of this stuff. All you have to do is secure stuff, which of course, that a lot of people would say, well, that's blue team. But the truth is they're also talking about, like what you were suggesting, your penetration testers too, because your penetration testers aren't allowed to play. Your penetration testers are only allowed to do what you tell them, when you tell them. They're like hounds that you have on a leash. So on the other spectrum, you have your black hats. Black hats are up to no good. In general, at least, from the older definitions of the thing, your black hats, this is all based off wizardry and all this other stuff. Your black hats were your people who were out to cause mayhem and trouble. And not just mayhem and trouble. They were doing so at the expense, with malice, at the expense of other individuals. Your gray hats were always your curious people. For a short period of time, people tried to sit there and say, well, is it gray or is it red hats, right? They could not make up their mind, but they eventually settled on gray hats. Gray hats are curious, and then your white hats can do no wrong. Now, what that means is, so your gray hat, for example, is going to decompile software that they purchase. And then they will see if the security is good. Your white hat won't, because the terms of service say you can't, right? Your black hat will, but only so they can go through and steal other people's stuff, break other people's things, right? So what you wind up doing is, if you purposefully blind yourself to even the potential that you could do something that might not be good, then you're gelding yourself right then and there. You're saying, okay, well, I'm not going to touch anything that might even smell off. I'm not going to decompile libraries. I'm not going to go, oh, you accidentally uploaded your source code? Well, I'm not going to take a look because that would be wrong. That would be immoral. And they pull this morality stuff, all of these morality arguments. And I would tell you that cloak is designed to make it so that they don't expose the fact that they don't know, that they can't. And it's not that they don't have the intelligence, it's that they lack the skills, and they don't want to admit that they lack the skills. And so Instead, they cower behind this false claim of being morally superior. I would never go through and do that. Well, if you never play, how do you know? How do you learn how to fight? You play fight, and you actually fight, but you play fight, right? If you never play fight, then what's going to happen if you actually ever have to fight? Won't be pretty. Right?
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true.
And, you know, people be, oh, well, penetration testers, they play fight all. No, they don't. Most of that stuff's automated these days. I mean, I remember when Core Impact came out. When Core Impact came out and they automated a significant portion of penetration testing, that thing would break anything and everything, mostly because everything was poorly written. But it would break just tons and tons of stuff. And you had all these people who bought it and started using it, and they were like, oh, look at how many vulnerabilities I found. So back when that came out, one of the weapons platforms I was doing work on, I was doing security work for them. They actually wanted to test me against Fortify and against Core Impact. And they were looking at false positives, false negatives, and then of course, you know, positive positives, and so on and so forth. So I went through and they were actually testing me against Core Impact and Fortify SCA. Fortify was relatively new, Core Impact was new, and really what the military was after was how much they could trust this software and performance. And I trounced both. I trounced them. In fact, so I had 3 hours, and I found 40,000, that's 40,000 vulnerabilities of various levels in that period of time. And then the both tools, Core Impact and Fortify SCA, came up with not only significantly fewer vulnerabilities, but most of their vulnerabilities were bogus. Well, you fast forward, now we're 2021, so what is that? Roughly 14 years. And you know, we recently had a vulnerability scanner, an application vulnerability scanner that was running scans on a whole bunch of different software, and it was missing so much stuff. There were false positives all over the place. And what that meant was all of these teams were just ignoring the results. And then, of course, you know, there were false negatives all over the place. It was missing SQL injection, easy, obvious SQL injection everywhere on that application, actually in those applications that we wound up finding. My point there being, unfortunately, that you cannot rely on the tools, and yet you have a lot of these white hats. That's what they do. They rely on the tools, and they don't recognize that this stuff is more complicated than they think it is, because they don't understand the attackers. They don't understand the vulnerabilities. You know, we had that one director who tried to sit there and I showed a beautiful vulnerability involving regular expression injection, which then allowed you to go through and completely, utterly, totally subvert their authentication, among other things. It actually provided a lot of different capabilities. And she sat there and was like, well, that's not a vulnerability, that's a bug. And there could be mitigating factors, and there could be she didn't say mitigations, but that's what she really meant. And I'm sitting there going, I've gone up the entire stack. There is no code anywhere in here that would mitigate it. The only thing that would mitigate it would be an application layer firewall, so a layer 7 firewall. But that won't mitigate it, because nobody checks for what we're talking about. And as you know, of course, those are blacklists. They're easy to circumvent.
Yeah. And that's what that person was thinking, that from a system level perspective, application layer, and not actually the
Right.
application itself.
Right.
So there's no protection there. There was no input validation or any validation period, for the things you could do with that. And again, it comes to the fact that she didn't actually understand what she
Right.
was doing.
She's the poster child for what we're talking about. So were two other individuals on that day. Four other individuals on that team. The list can keep growing the more I think about it. And it's because they never played in that realm. They did not, so they didn't understand the way these vulnerabilities work. They could not spot them. You know, you can spot them in code. They're ridiculously easy. They stick right out if you know what you're looking for. And if you're doing digital forensics, one of the interesting things, getting back to that discussion, is a good digital forensics person understands the way organized crime works and thinks, the way nation states work and think, the way your disgruntled employees and former employees think, the methods they would use, and so on and so forth, iterating through the different actors and agents. They get all of that. And they also understand the way your network works. Now, they don't have an in-depth necessarily knowledge of these things, nor are they experts in any way, shape, or form, usually on networks or applications or operating systems, but they understand how all of this stuff works well enough that a good one can take logs they've never seen before and correlate and aggregate them and extract the data from them. Unfortunately, I would say most digital forensics people can't, but good ones can. And those are the only ones I would really, you're not, in my opinion, you're not digital forensics if you cannot go through and read arbitrary logs and figure out what's going on. If you cannot find malware, if I sat there and said, hey, this system's infected, you need to be able to tell me exactly how quickly and easily, with minimal time, you're going to detect the infection or detect a compromise and all this other stuff, because you don't have time to play. You can't mess around. We did an engagement recently where someone was quoting on the order of 1,400 hours total. That's how many manpower hours it would take to investigate one incident, this one incident. And it wasn't even an outrageous incident. And I looked at that and I said, these hours are ridiculous. You cannot take that long. You can't take that many people. And if you worked it out, the shortest amount of time it would take, assuming that all of these people could work concurrently, was 3 weeks. You can't work 3 weeks investigating one incident, not if you're working for an organization, which was the case here. That organization is going to get how many different incidents in a day? You can't tie up 6 people on one incident for 3 weeks. It's not possible. It's ridiculous. But that's unfortunately what happens when you get these people who don't know what they're doing involved. So digital forensics winds up, because you have to understand, you have to have at least a broad understanding of technology and of laws, and you have to be able to present yourself in court, because as a digital forensics expert, unlike your incident response guys, you actually have to testify as an expert witness in court. Now, some people are going to go through and say, well, as an incident responder, I had to testify. Well, what you testified is that you took the image, that when you showed up, you took these pictures of the system and stuff like that. That's different than going up and standing up in front of the court and testifying to your report about exactly how the incident occurred, exactly who did it, saying, I'm telling you that, Russia did this or China did this based on all the information, and then walking the jury through in layman terms how all this happened, or this ex-spouse or soon to be ex-spouse did this, and here's how they did it. That's digital forensics. Incident response doesn't do any of that. Incident response can't, and they don't understand the laws well enough. I get asked by lawyers all the time, I'm working some case, and they're asking me what laws were violated, and I have to tell them what laws were violated. Incident response will never, they don't do that. That's not in their wheelhouse. It's just not something that they do. And like I said, I mean, it's an EMT, a paramedic, versus a surgeon. Both are vital. Both are needed. I'm not disparaging one or the other. I'm just saying they're completely different, and the skill sets required for one, the education required for one, the certifications required for one, and so on and so forth, are far greater than for the other. So, and then of course, you have cryptology or cryptography. That actually is, I'll be honest with you. You know what makes that one hard? The math.
Yeah. If you suck at math, then you're gonna suck at that.
You know it.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that's a field that's all about patterns, finding patterns, preventing other people from finding patterns by obscuring them, things of that nature. It's a very fun field. I've done a lot of that as well. I do all of these things actively, and I have done all of these things actively, and we'll discuss that in more detail over the many podcasts. But that one, I think the real barrier to entry is the math, and it's a significant barrier to entry, huge barrier to entry. The mathematics involved in many cases are they make people's head hurt. So and then
So that
please,
was that so we have digital forensics as 3, right?
yep, digital forensics is 3, cryptology or cryptography, that's number 2.
Okay.
So usually you have to have a mathematics degree for that. Not necessarily. Sometimes you can get away with computer science, but generally you'll see most of those people have mathematics degrees. It is a fun field if you're into that kind of thing. I like challenges. I like puzzles, so I do enjoy it. But at the same time, it can be very complicated. There's a lot of math involved when you're doing it, at least if you're doing it at a certain level, the non-amateur level. Back in 2006, Xerox, for example, I was looking at Xerox's DocuShare, I believe it was. And their login screen, for example, in this case, what they did was they XOR'd. So you put in your username, you put in your password. They had a random seed, and they did an exclusive OR on the random seed and the plain text password, which then, of course, creates this encrypted, this ciphertext, right? And then they send the ciphertext with the with their IV, the key that they exclusive OR it with. And so all you had to do was capture that traffic. Well, if you capture that traffic, as you know, of course, A XORed B equals C, B XORed C equals A XORed C equals B. So they gave you 2 of the parts. You do an exclusive OR, and you get back your password. That's amateur to me. That's not cryptology. That's right. That's playing with the script kiddies. That's what that really is. What I'm talking about is more like the NSA stuff, nation state stuff, breaking RSA, AES, that kind of thing. And I have done a lot of that stuff, and it's a lot of fun. Breaking SHA, the different SHAs, and so on and so forth. That's a lot of fun. It's just, it's very complicated, and it takes a lot of computational resources and a lot of time. Usually, not always. I had one incident, one engagement I had with a a very special algorithm that the United States had created. That one took a weekend. I broke it in a weekend and shook the very foundations of major organizations. Let's put it that way. But that's rare. That one is one that if I could, I would. But that kind of thing is rare. It usually takes significantly longer. So, and then next comes application security. That's actually the hardest. The barrier to entry is actually the greatest in general. Not always, because you'll have a lot of organizations that really need someone and they'll take anyone. But that's the case with any job, right? It's how, I swear that's how some of these CEOs and COOs got hired.
Now it's funny because you would think that the second one would be the hardest.
Yeah.
Compared to application security, because it's hard if you suck at math.
Yeah.
Especially if you like the idea of cryptography. But I always usually like the idea, but I'm okay at math, but I'm not gonna say I'm like a mathematician or anything like. But yeah, so that's kind of weird, but
well, and it does actually boggle a lot of people's minds. And a lot of it comes down to, and really what we're talking about in each one of these cases is in order to be successful, right? Because I can put anyone in any position. It doesn't mean they're going to be successful. In order to be successful in application security, you have to know your network security. You have to know how networks work. You have to understand how operating systems work, because heaven help you if you don't know how that scheduler is going to work. Heaven help you if you don't understand the way I/O is going to be scheduled, the way CPU time is going to be scheduled, the way the interrupts work. If you don't know the way the CPU and the CPU interrupts work, the way CPU parallelization occurs, how things need to be synchronized, what can be rearranged by the compiler. So now you're talking about how the compiler works. What can't be rearranged, how things get rearranged. You have to understand the intricacies of the language, and it's never just one. If you're in application security, it's any language, and you'll be given some application, as you know, you have no clue you've never seen this language before, and you've got to figure out how the language works. You have to figure out how the compiler works. You have to figure out how the operating system is going to treat everything. If it's just in time compilation, how does it look in machine language? How does it look in bytecode? How does it look when it's actually going through? What is occurring and what is allowed to occur? And on top of that, you have to understand, because most applications involve the network and involve interacting with the operating system, you have to understand how that application is positively or negatively impacting operating system security or network security, and how network and operating system security are impacting that application. You have to understand cryptography enough to know, number one, if they're using an appropriate algorithm, right? Key, all that good stuff, right? Make sure the key strength is adequate and so on and so forth. But you also have to understand if they're storing everything in an appropriate way, how they're clearing memory. I mean, it is insanely complicated what is involved if you're going to be good. And that's the key. I mean, to be good for application security, you have to know so much more than your network security folks, than your system security folks, than your digital forensics folks, than even the admins, like your system administrators, application administrators, so on and so forth. You have to know a lot more than they know. And if you don't, you're not going to be successful. And when I'm talking successful, I mean able to, number one, converse with the administrators and developers so that they can secure that application, so that they can rectify any vulnerabilities. Number two, find vulnerabilities. And when I'm talking about finding vulnerabilities, I'm not talking about the script kiddie stuff. I'm talking about real no-kidding vulnerabilities. You have to be able to test that application, test its encryption, test how it decrypts stuff, Test to see if you can inject anything, and I mean anything. Because, you know, everyone focuses like, okay, well, SQL injection, we have buffer overflows. All right, what else do we have? We have LDAP injection. Well, okay, that's great. We talked about it before. I had an instance where someone cited an application that I had helped to secure, and they said, well, this thing's vulnerable to LDAP injection. There was no LDAP server. It was a Solr server on the back end. It's a search engine. What they did was they ran a test where they included an asterisk and where they didn't include an asterisk. Well, the results came back and they're like, oh, LDAP injection. I'm going, if you know anything about application security, you would have known that's not how you test and figure out if what you're seeing is LDAP injection or not. But they hit us for LDAP injection. So I had to sit there and argue, and this was an actual penetration test. This wasn't a vulnerability scan. They did a penetration test and that's what they put down. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry, but if I'm doing a penetration test and I find LDAP injection, I'm going to do more than run 2 queries and say, oh, look, it's LDAP injection. I'm going to do a lot more than that. And I'm going to figure out what you're running. So you remember we had that engagement, you had that engagement where you were working on an SAP plugin, I believe it was, or something of that nature. And, you know, you found injection. Was it SQL injection? No, it wasn't. See, but you know, a lot of people wouldn't know the difference. You figured out the difference, didn't you?
Yeah.
And that's the difference between your script kiddie white hats and people who are actually successful in this job. Because you found out it was SAP's version of SQL, which is not SQL. It's different. And you're able to properly then exploit it and properly then report on it so that they can properly then fix it. Because if you told them they had SQL injection, I guarantee they would have said, there is no SQL server. What are you talking about? We don't have SQL injection.
Especially because everything has its own query, right? They have their own query language, and it does not make it SQL injection. It may be similar to SQL, but it's not SQL injection. And we'll get to that point, but I'll let you finish.
Well, and that's exactly right. And, you know, imagine if you were not good and either one, you just hit them for SQL injection, or two, you then pressed hard and ran SQL map. SQL map, of course, wouldn't find anything because it can't, because the queries are completely different. The structure is, the language is different. I said it was SAP's version of SQL, but that's a gross understatement. And so Nmap would have come back with nothing. And so what would you have probably put on a report? You probably would have removed it, right?
Yep. And then you missed a finding.
And then you missed a finding.
That somebody else, well, and to be honest, let's go there. That, you miss a finding, and probably nobody else would actually know it unless they're really good at this. Which brings me to the conversation before you finish, is how are... You're saying it is hard to get into application security because of all those things you need to know. But then you have those people who get into application security by whatever chance, because they either worked as a developer in AppSec, or they have all these years that they were development and blah, 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 right? But you get those people that are in there, but they don't even understand that, which is why it frightens me, because you have people that are a higher level.
Yeah.
And they don't know these things. They don't even know these are simple things.
Yeah.
Okay, they're not. These are things you should know. And when you introduce that, they're like, "No, this is not correct. This is not it." And even though you have the proof there, they don't understand it, so they're going to tell you that it's not correct, which means that you miss a finding because of that. Now, if that's the case, the people that are higher up above you are missing that finding also, because they don't have real understanding of how applications work, and that not every application is the same. And also, there are always going to be new frameworks, new queries, new languages, new different things that you're not going to know. That doesn't mean that it's not, exact. And one specific thing, as we talked about before, is why would .NET be any different from Java?
Right.
When it was built closely related to Java. So my thing is, why would I put a severity that I found in .NET lower than I would put for Java?
Right. Right.
Because it's .NET. That doesn't make any sense.
Oh, yeah. So, it's funny. Going to the first part of the question, you're right. So, really, one of the important things here when we talk difficulty is, again, I mean, we're talking about difficulty with regard to being successful. And you're right, the barriers to entry are supposed to be much bigger than they are. But what's happened is there's been a huge shortage, honestly, since it started, of security personnel. Huge shortage. And it hasn't been filled, and it's not going to be filled anytime soon. And the government is trying to throw all this money at it, and that does not work. It hasn't worked, and it will continue to not work, for a variety of reasons. Because as you know, this is really a temperament thing, and it's a mentality thing. To be good and successful, you have to have a curious mentality. You have to be the kind of guy or gal. Guy to me is non-sex, but I'll say guy or gal, who likes to play, loves to play. It has to be a passion for you, or you will not be successful. You will not find really neat vulnerabilities that no one else is finding. It's just not going to happen. But unfortunately, because times are so desperate, you're seeing a lot of people who are getting hired in security in general who have no business. And then you're seeing a lot of companies going through and they're saying, okay, well, we're just going to take this developer with little or no development experience and no security experience, and we're going to turn them into application security. But it doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. Number one, if you're taking a developer, it better be a special developer. It better be a very good developer who's very open-minded, who finds a lot of bugs, and not just regular bugs, and always plays with them. That ability to play is really the integral part here. And what I think you're going to find is, until our industry and until organizations start clamping down on these people who really don't belong, it's going to continue to be polluted. And what that means is you'll have all of these people who will tell you your system is good to go when it is in fact fraught with vulnerabilities. And, in the short term, that may seem like a great thing, but it really isn't. Because if you're releasing something that contains vulnerabilities because you're like this and you're covering your ears, hear no evil, see no evil, that kind of thing, then I promise you, your malicious people, they will find it. And when they find it, you're going to wish that your security folks had done their job and had been competent. So,
yeah.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are in our industry who simply do not belong. I would argue most of the people in security don't belong. Most of the people, I would easily place it 95 percentile, have no business in it. They don't have the attitude for it. They don't have the passion for it. And they don't have the knowledge or skill set or curiosity to do it, or the drive to do it well and to do it right. They're in it for the money. They're in it for the prestige. They're in it for all kinds of reasons, none of which are good. And they are your white hats and they're script kiddies. And again, they will hide behind the whole goody two-shoe bit so that you can't find out that they really don't know what they're talking about. Usually they can't even talk a good game, but we'll just say for giggles that they can talk a good game, but they could never actually compromise a system, especially not a system with any real complex vulnerabilities. They could only do your script kiddie cross-site scripting kind of stuff. But that's, unfortunately, that has been the case for a very long time.
And it is crazy because, like I told you before, when I actually started in application security was around 2015. I didn't even know what an application security was. I knew
Yeah.
what applications were, but didn't even really know what it was, and kind of got involved in it from there, being in that job and that that area. But not knowing and kind of coming around thinking that all right, a lot of people in this field have a very good knowledge of what they're doing, especially when it comes to application security. And I didn't know how in depth application security was at the time, and then actually getting that chance and seeing how in depth, where, like you said, if I may, that you have web application, web services, all right, and then you have thick clients, if you want to call them that. You have IoT devices, mobile devices, and then if we talk about IoT devices, those all encompass everything that I just said. Also mixing with hardware, which also includes software into that. And then you just have an encumbrance amount of different stuff that that you have to know.
Yeah.
And not even just that, source code reviews and reading the source code and understanding the vulnerabilities in source code, that sometimes you'll find things in source code that you won't find dynamically when you're actually testing.
Right.
So you have all those things you have to know and be able to do well. So you're not just doing one thing, and it's different from where you're being a network penetration tester or all these other different areas where, you have to know, you have to know a lot of things.
Right.
But it's not like you're working with, and correct me if I'm wrong, not like you're working with a ton of different technologies.
Yeah.
It may be, in most of the technologies are the same, it just may be a different name.
Yeah.
But it's really the same stuff. And then you have all the tools there needed. With AppSec, there's no tools. You cannot, if you may run a tool, but more likely they're false positive. And we know Burp is the main tool that most people use for certain things, proxies. But there's no tool.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to run a tool and think you're going to find all of these great things. It does not matter.
Yeah.
And especially if you're going in different areas.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So it's sad because the truth is so much energy and effort was put into network security first and network vulnerability scanners because it was the easiest. It is the easiest. All you have to do is try configuring a router, a switch, a firewall, hub, repeater, whatever, and setting up a network. It's actually not complicated. It really isn't. So they started there. They put a lot of energy into that. And then they went to the operating system and they put a lot of energy into that. Applications have proved to be too difficult. And for a variety of reasons. Because with operating systems, what do? They read your configuration files. They read, if you're Windows, your registry. And then, of course, they go through and, pull like ports that are open, processes, and then they'll read file system permissions, right? Very straightforward. Networking devices, honestly, the way almost all of them work, they do a port scan, of course, and then what they'll do is they pull your configuration file and they parse that. It's so cheap. It works though, for the most part anyway. And of course they'll check to see like, what version of the operating system you're running and things of that nature, version checking. But again, nothing complicated, all very simple. Application security is a whole nother beast because there isn't a configuration file. There isn't anything to it. There's not one language. There's not 5 languages. There aren't 10 languages. There are tons of languages. And we're just talking about major languages. And oftentimes there's a huge disparity between them, the way they work and all this other stuff. Plus, like we said, there are all the complexities that come with it. The operating systems, how it's going to run, and then what backend services that application is calling to. Most applications are actually composed of a whole bunch of different libraries, sometimes cobbled together rather poorly. And so now you have to scan these libraries. Well, the libraries could be in completely different languages. And you have a lot of applications that are written in different languages, and then applications can be parceled, right? So I can have a part of the application here, a part of the application here, a part of the application here, and that whole thing makes up the greater application. So perhaps my client here doesn't have any vulnerabilities, but my server here does, or this other server component or this middleware does. But maybe that vulnerability is only obvious if you take in the broader application. So if I scan this portion, nothing comes of it. If I scan that portion, nothing comes of it. If I scan that portion, nothing comes of it. But if I look at the thing in its entirety, by golly, things are getting bled. And then, when I scan through code auto-magically through these tools, I don't necessarily understand what that, in fact, they rarely understand what that code is doing, its purpose, how it's going to be used. And that makes a big difference. It makes a huge difference. What's the source of this data? What's the destination of this data? There are so many complexities, and these scanners have just done a terrible job. The scanners, when they first started out, actually were nothing more than grep. That's all they were. They were hunting for words they didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
And they've become a little more complicated, but they're still nothing. None of them. And it doesn't matter what their advertisement says. I will beat every single one of them, hands down, easily. And that's doing a code review or doing a black box test or whatever makes you happy. And then, of course, like we already said, those tools are also going to come up with a lot of false positives. And what happens when you have a whole bunch of false positives? People ignore the results. And, they'll start, every time it comes up with this kind of vulnerability, it's wrong. Well, except the time when it's right, you still have to investigate. You still have to actually manually trace through. And that's why they do no good if they find 100,000 vulnerabilities, but only 3 of them are vulnerabilities. Who did you help? You actually caused a bigger waste of money and time. I have no faith in those tools, any of them, and I've used a lot of them. I've used a ton of them. And, they always promise so much, but they never deliver. They never deliver. It's very complicated. Applications are very complicated.
And for that reason that, it has to take a human to actually review them.
Right.
Because application, and even when whatever you're running a scan is an application are not smart enough. They're only as smart as the person that wrote it.
Right.
And they're not smart enough to change on the fly and say, oh, this is something new. Let me see this. So we haven't got to that point and don't know if we will, but we haven't got to that point in our technology. Yeah. But at the same time, it makes it more difficult to be able to do application security because of all the things you have to know, and there's no scanner to do so.
Yeah.
Like I remember I was asked to find a way to automate thick client assessments and tests. And I'm thinking to myself, there's some things I could probably use to do, but there's no freaking way I'm going to be able to do that because every different application is different.
Yeah.
Maybe it just works on this one, but it's not going to work on that one. There's no way. You just kind of have to know and understand how to find these different vulnerabilities and search for them. So there's no way that's going to happen. But and also if I may say also in AppSec, there's not a lot of books. There's not a lot of research. There's not a lot of things like data that you can go and say, okay, how do I hack away at a thick client? All right. Or how do I hack away at this resource or this new microservice or REST API that they have, or like you said, this query language that I've never seen. Is there research on that? No, there's not a lot of research on this stuff, or even IoT. That's pretty high. There's not a lot of research on all of the things you're hacking there. So you kind of have to be able to do your own, know your own, play around, as you said. That's with anything with hacking. In order to be proficient and learn from it. I agree with you. AppSec is one of the hardest things to be in, but there are a lot of people that may be fooled to think that the people in it itself are really good at what they do.
Right, because it's magic. Nobody understands it. The developers don't understand it. you've seen developers and their minds just boggled and blown discussing these different vulnerabilities, basic vulnerabilities, and discussing how to fix them. And it's just such a huge shock to them that someone would, let alone could, do these kinds of negative things based on how they wrote their code. They don't get it. Well, if they don't understand, and developers can be very smart, very technical, they know what they wrote, but if they can't understand it, or if it confounds them, then I guarantee management has no clue. And I guarantee non-developers have no clue. And so what you get is an industry where it's particularly easy to blind people and snowball them, pretend like you have knowledge that you really don't. And you see a lot of that. There are a lot of posers in our field, especially in application security, in all security period, but especially in application security.
Yeah, you can get away with it in network penetration
Oh,
tests.
yeah.
You
All
can get
the
away with it in a
scanners.
lot of different
Yeah.
areas, but you go to AppSec, you'll truly see that there's no getting away with that.
Yeah.
You either know it or you don't. But like I said, you have some people, as you said, that they know the terminology, they know how to talk to talk. They may have a little bit of stuff, but when it comes to actually understanding how
Right.
attackers are hacking these applications, they have no clue. Because if
Right.
they did, they would not be asking you or even questioning the things you found or things you've done. So in that perspective, and I know you've done this. I know you got this tons of time, but you'll be on assessment. You do your assessments, and you'll find some crazy vulnerabilities that are not your normal thing. Maybe even in you're on your team or department. You'll find these crazy things. Nobody probably understands it or gets it or whatever, or even know what the hell to call it, right? And you find it, and it's very critical and very impactful to the client. And then the client says to you, "Well, how come you found this, but our other
Yeah.
place that or we were dealing with other consultants and people that we were working with, company did not find this. How come? How did you find this?" Um, and it's just mind-boggling to me that you're telling me that you have all of these companies that do security, especially application security, and none of these guys are finding these things. Or do they not have the creativity, the open mind? And that's one thing I found. People don't have their open mindset.
Yeah.
And as we go back, they've never, and I hate to say it this way, but they've never played around or never done anything or have that mindset to know how attackers are actually going to try. If I'm looking at an application, I am not looking at it from a commercial perspective. Okay, I'm not looking at it from a white hat perspective.
Right.
I am going to now turn on my black hat, and say, if I am a black hat hacker, what am I doing?
Right.
All right, what am I trying to do, and how am I going to do this? All right, I am not going to give you some bull crap assessment saying, "Oh yeah, I was able to do such and such, and here I'm just going to stop there." What am I actually going to do? In order for AppSec to be a true red team or penetration testing or whatever you want to call it, like the network testing as they're always glorified, you got to take it a step further. You got to know what the attackers are actually going to do.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that creative and open mindset or that experience, how the heck are you going to actually prove and show value to your client?
Yeah.
And how are you going to even know any of this stuff? You're not going to know. You're just talking out your butt. You're just talking about things you have no freaking clue.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You're exactly right. It is unfortunate, but you will find anyone who's been in this long enough and who is good has come across exactly what you're talking about. They've sat there and they've given a report, and the people will look at it and they'll go, "Well, why are you finding all this stuff? Why wasn't this found before?"
Yep.
Because you hired people who aren't good at it. I don't know what do you want me to tell you? I happen to love what I do, and I do what I love, and I'm very good at it as a result. And thankfully it pays, and it pays well. But what do you want me to tell you? Yeah, I can show you how to exploit every single one of these things. And that, I think, unfortunately, though, it undermines security when you have these people who really don't belong, because when everyone walks around with this false sense of security and then they get that bubble broken, now they don't know who to believe, who to trust. And you see that play out when they read the reports and then when they see it in action. And they have that come to Jesus moment. It shakes the very foundations of their world. And it can be very sad to see, because a lot of times they feel like they've been lied to and cheated and all that money wasted for all those years. But I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I didn't do it. I wasn't the one. I wasn't involved. And the only way to get rid of it, really, is to reform our industry.
But does that mean getting, like, and let's get to this point, does that mean getting rid of some of these bullcrap certifications? Because you know, as I know, and some of the people that we knew who never hacked a day in their life, never actually really had any real development experience, none of that, no security experience, nothing, got a certification, and all of a sudden they were a hacker. They were the best thing since white bread, sliced bread. I mean, they were the best thing you've ever seen. And you, the person who's been doing it for years and years, and has been doing it since since you had, diapers. Since you were in diapers. You know what I'm saying? They could tell you that you're wrong, but because they have that certification,
right?
You know, and I think that's a big problem too. Like, you go to these certification courses, you take them, you know how to take a test. You don't really know the material really well, but you know how to take a test. You know how to do CTFs, which are bullcrap. They're not realistic. They're good to practice if you want to practice things, but they're not like I said before. Some of that stuff that I've seen, I have never ever. There's more than likely, if you do, there's once in a blue moon, but you've never ever actually been able to really successfully exploit or even find that in the wild. Now, with that being said, you have these certifications that gives this false narrative that this person actually know what they're doing, and they actually don't.
Yeah. Certifications, I hate them. And I say this as a guy who has a lot of them. But I have them because I have to. So the DoD requires it. A lot of organizations I work for require it and put stock in it. And it's wrong. And now the reason why they started that was because there is no degree. There was no degree for security, period. I would argue there still isn't. The programs that are out there are just so bad. Terrible. If you are getting a degree in any of the, computer security, system security, whatever, just throw it in the trash, because all you've done is waste your time. And I have not found anyone competent come out of a program like that. Not one, not yet. The only way I think that could happen is if you already were competent in the field before you went in, and that was just for a piece of paper. That's the only way I could see that happening. And I have seen a lot of universities, and I have seen a lot of programs, and I get asked by a lot of universities to create their programs and to give their classes, and I refuse. But so they went through and they said, well, okay, we want a certification to know that these guys are legit. So they started pushing heavily for all these certifications, and they're terrible, absolutely horrible. So I have helped create questions for some certifications, for example, and I have audited certifications. They've asked me to come in and audit them and tell them, problems I saw and how they can make it better and all this other stuff. I've been doing that for a very long time. And I will tell you that when I put forward good, strong questions that would help weed out people who really didn't know, those usually are the first ones to get struck down by these certification organizations. And it's because it's a money-making machine. It makes a lot of money. They don't want a bunch of failures. They want just enough to give them prestige. But then you have all these boot camps, and the boot camps throw everything into disarray. And these boot camps, you study for 6 days, 4 days, 2 days, some are 2 days. And then you the next day or a couple days later go off and you take a test. Well, more often than not, what those things are actually doing is teaching you to the test. Well, that invalidates the whole thing. Then it becomes a test-taking exercise. I mean, the whole thing already is a test-taking exercise, right? It's a measure of how well do you test. I don't know about you, Ron, but I don't test well. I managed to pass the exams. I've never failed one yet, but I don't test well. I'm terrible at taking tests.
And I suck. Never been a good test taker at all. So I agree. That's why I just don't waste my time on it. I feel like, here's my thought about this. I feel like in order to be a hacker or whatever you want to be in life, you literally have to do it.
Yeah.
No certification or degree or any of that is going to actually give you that. Like, as you know, went to school. We all went to school.
Right.
And what did I always say? That I felt like I went to school to get a piece of paper when they didn't teach me a god darn thing.
Yeah.
All right. I learned everything on my own by doing. And the only thing they really, okay, I'll take that back. The only thing they really taught me how to do was to learn how to learn.
That's right. And that's all that they're good for.
Right. So you waste all of this thousands of dollars. You go in debt, and you still don't have anything to show for it. And then when you really think about it, when you go for a job, you still don't know what the hell you're doing.
Right.
Because you have no real valuable experience.
Right. The programs, and it would seem, it doesn't matter what the program is, but the programs do not have what companies really want or need. They're not actually giving people the skills other than, as you said, the ability to learn. It's not giving them the skills that they need. And a lot of that is because it takes specific software and stuff like that. The industry in general moves significantly faster than academia. And so by the time they get their programs set up, and by the time they get the classes all set up and everything's been squared away, it's out of date. Industry's moved on. And it moved on actually usually many years ago. So now those students, they get out into the real world, so to speak, and they have to relearn everything. So thank goodness they were taught how to learn, because otherwise they'd be really, truly hosed. But at the same time, it winds up begging the question, why? And the only answer I've ever really consistently gotten was, number one, because it is good to teach people how to learn, although you would have hoped that high school and stuff would have taught that, but they don't. They really don't. And then the other thing is that it teaches, it's commitment. Well, who cares if you've demonstrated that you can commit? In this day and age, how important is that really? I mean, I don't know. I think the college is important for certain things. I definitely agree. And I think people should, in general, do it if the price is right. You should not pay $50,000 for what colleges are giving. And I don't care what college you're talking about. I haven't seen a college that gave an education that was worth $50,000. 30, okay, maybe, depending on what the degree is, but most certainly not 50. But all these people, they pay huge amounts of money, and it's a real travesty.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, only your 50,000. In my opinion, I don't believe colleges are offering anything that's worth any thousands of dollars, because if we go back and say it's back then in the 1990s or something,
Yeah.
where you probably you didn't have what we have today. You didn't
Yeah,
have
that's
any
true.
YouTubes and all of that other crap. Maybe you say, okay, I want to go get this knowledge from somebody because I can't get anywhere else. Nowadays, everything you want to learn is online.
Yeah, that is
So
true.
why would I pay? And that was my thing. Why would I pay a college to learn C# when I can go do that online? Or I can go order the book. I mean, the same book that they're having me read, they're
Right.
not, and especially with the instructors, a lot of the instructors are not really, they don't have that level
Right.
of knowledge to really teach. So you're not getting the knowledge you want, and you could possibly go do that yourself, read a book, and then start coding yourself. You know, same thing with hardware. Why do they think that hackers are hackers? Why do they think that hackers are a lot further and ahead of the industry now? Because what do we do? We're curious about things, so we want to learn it. So we take it apart, we disassemble it, we do whatever we need to do to understand it. And
Right.
if now with the internet you have more resources to find out, okay, what's really going on with this? Okay, what's really going on with this device? Say for instance, this nice little IP camera, that I have really took apart. But just say I want to know what's really going on with that device. You can take it apart, look at it, go to the FCC ID database, look at the website and look at what's going on, get more things on the schematics and the technology it's using, and then start finding ways to break it. All right. But also we find ways to make it more secure.
Right.
So in that perspective, if you want to become a hardware engineer, you don't have to go to school for that. Okay,
Yeah.
you can learn that on your own. If you want to become a software engineer, you don't have to go to school for that. And I tell people nowadays, I wouldn't waste my time on getting a degree in this day and age. Back then, maybe it might have been worth it because you didn't have that much knowledge and you couldn't get it off the internet. And the only way you could do that was probably go to somebody like yourself if you were teaching and get that. But nowadays, there's too many vast array of stuff for people to know. Like my kids know how to do all type of things with their technology because guess what? They have the internet.
Right.
Back then we had the internet, but of course we didn't have all the stuff we have now.
So that's actually really interesting, and I think it's important to use this as a moment to talk about the differences between there are two competing college philosophies. So you have your technical schools, and that's born from Prussia. So what I think is maybe 1500s, somewhere around the 1500s, maybe it was 1700s. Anyway, I have to think about it.
Yeah.
So actually, I think that was the 1800s. Anyway, it's somewhere around there. Those Prussians, it's that German spirit, right? They sat there and they decided to create technical schools. And now that's in stark contrast to your liberal arts. Liberal arts or your traditional college. Those have been around for a very, very long time. And it's interesting because I think your technical skills are the most vulnerable here, or technical schools are the most vulnerable here, and technical skills, because with your technical school, what they do is they teach you specific applications and technologies and stuff like that. Well, unless you're talking like a trade, the problem is a lot of that stuff is moving very quickly, insanely quickly, and it becomes outdated. That's why if you go to a technical school, like I'm not going to name one because I will get sued by them, but if you go to a specific popular technical university that may have gotten in trouble semi recently, what you find is that they are teaching you specific technologies. Well, by the time you enter the workforce, those technologies are out of date, especially now. So if you didn't get taught the more general principal concepts, then now you have to go back and you have to learn those. And you also have to learn how to learn if you were never taught that. Now, if you already knew how to learn, how to teach yourself, then you're not going to be in a world of hurt. Everything will be easy. I would question why you paid thousands of dollars, but at least at that point, you're like, well, it's okay. I'll relearn the technology. The problem though is technical schools don't teach you any of that. So you had better have gone into one of those schools already knowing it. On the opposite end of the spectrum are that older traditional liberal arts college perspective. And the way those wound up working is they didn't focus on the latest and greatest, and they openly admitted it. What their big thing is that they would expose you to a whole bunch of things, and that shotgun approach versus that laser focus. And they would try instead to teach you fundamentals and teach you how to teach yourself. Right? So that makes the traditional structure actually less vulnerable to the modern age than the German, that Prussian technical model, because that technical model really does produce degrees that are truly, utterly worthless as technology ages, but it's also worthless as you move up the chain. See, and here's the big difference. You had all these organizations complaining, okay, well, when someone comes from a traditional school and they enter the workforce, what do you have to do? You have to teach them the technology, right? So you've got a few months lead time before they're useful in any way, shape, or form. Of course, depending on the individual. That's why Germany, Prussia created those technical schools, was so you wouldn't have that lead up time. Now you don't need to learn the technology, you just need to learn that organization's processes. Now here's the problem. As you advance up the chain, and now you're moving toward management or whatever it happens to be, or as technology becomes out of date, that technical school stuff becomes less and less useful. As you move up the chain with a liberal arts degree, what you learned actually becomes more useful. As technology ages, what you learned becomes more useful. But the problem is this is one of those where you're screwed either way from a business perspective, because either you're going to have someone who's going to be great for the first few years and then, it peters off, or you're going to have someone who's going to take a few years to become useful. And that is a problem colleges have yet to solve. And I dare say it's almost as if they refuse to resolve it, because they have split. They're two factions, and they refuse to come together and create the one true form that will actually fix what businesses need. And they refuse to be more responsive.
Yeah, I mean, but the question is, do they actually know? Like, you think they get, like, where I want, you would think they actually knew the answer to that. So you get all of these professional people, and they're telling you what the problems are, but you're not actually fixing none of them.
Yeah. Well, and probably even worse than that is they act like they know everything and you know nothing. And then,
And isn't that and if we go back and we put this in full circle, that it seems like this is a retrending cycle, like a repeating cycle for everything in every area. It doesn't matter what it is. Everybody thinks they know everything, so you don't know anything.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Which doesn't fix the problem. So,
no, it doesn't. It's that lack of... See, some people would inappropriately say it's that machismo, right? Being hyper masculine, but it has nothing to do with masculinity. And, men can never be wrong. But that's actually not true. I see this in males and females. And it's ego is what it really is. It's egoism. If I admit that I'm wrong here, then I'm admitting that I could be wrong elsewhere. Well, if you never admit that you're wrong, then you can never learn. It's the only way anyone here learns. At some point, you have to admit you don't know something and admit that you're also wrong.
Yeah. That's true. Um, but again, I don't think we're ever going to fix none of those problems. So,
No,
but I would just say that I don't feel like I feel that education should be free.
I agree.
Um,
I do.
and you know, it's just too expensive. And a lot of this stuff, like I say, you can get online. Like
Yeah.
everything I have learned has been online or having great mentors like yourself that I could reach out to and say, hey, what is this?
Yeah.
Or something I may know, like, have you ever seen this before? Um, and it makes you better. So I believe, and I always tell people that I'm training or helping out or who's trying to get in the industry and say, look, man, it's better to do than to wait on somebody to hold your hand and
Yeah.
wait all the way through it. You have to get dirty. You got to get your hands dirty and play around in order to understand what's really going on.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
so that's my thought, and that's how you become better in this field. But back to again, AppSec. Um, I agree with you with being the hardest field to, and I won't say to get in, but to be successful in.
Yeah.
Um, it's not the hardest I say to get in nowadays because I've seen a lot of people come and go, but it's the hardest to be successful in and maybe even stay successful in
Right.
if you don't continue to grow. Um, so yeah, I agree, and I would agree at that being the top one. And I like how you explain each level and where they rank. And I'm sure there's going to be some people who are not going to like your thought process on that, and they're
You
going to
know
feel
it.
that their feels the best. But again, as you can see, you can see that AppSec is becoming number one. Okay, it's becoming the number one thing nowadays because everything has an application to it. Like we go back to what you just said earlier, where network devices are getting GUIs, right? They're getting GUI application. They're getting some web applications you can go into and you can work with that. I mean, now you start getting into a lot of array of different things. And now you start having the application security guys start not only do you have network guys testing things, but you have the application security guys coming in and testing their application that is running on their device.
Right.
And then
Right.
now you also integrate IoT, which falls into that spectrum of application security.
Right.
So you start branching out when you start adding these things, and now application security guys have to do all of that. It does not just become a network thing.
Well,
So yeah,
you're right. And virtualizing a lot of this network hardware and software is also fundamentally shifting things even further.
Yeah.
And it is just so funny to me because anyone who argues with that ranking with me, I can sit there and successfully state I have been doing all of those things for over 20 years for the federal government, for the military, for organizations all around the world, for foreign entities, for commercial entities, all of those things. So it's not as though I'm saying it to raise myself up. I'm stating these things out of experience as someone who's currently doing them and as someone who has been doing them for a long time. And I have observed the industry for a very long time. And I agree. I know we're going to, I will get a lot of hate because I mean, everyone wants to feel special. Everyone wants to feel great. And the important thing is remembering your paramedic is easier than a surgeon in many ways. And some parts of it are harder. But that doesn't mean that your paramedic isn't valuable. Just because you're not number one doesn't mean you're not valuable. It doesn't mean I'm saying we can get rid of all network security folks right here, right now. They have a very important use. And people do need to remember that. It just means you're not the... you can't run around talking like you're a rocket scientist or a heart surgeon. Because you're not. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
or a rock star.
Or a rock star, that's right.
Everybody wants to be a rock star in this industry, right?
You know it. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. Everybody has everybody has importance in this field. There's importance for everybody, and without them, you don't have this ecosystem. You don't
Right.
have, this equalization
Right.
here, because we need everybody in this field to do what they do best. But you know, uh, it's just a progression, man. Like, at one point in time, everything's gonna be, there's gonna be something better than other or hotter than other. And like I said, I'm not sure how long. And as far as I'm concerned, AppSec is gonna always be a big thing, unless there's something that and the only way I can see it being different. You can tell me what you think about this. This is a hypothetical thing. Is if somehow the government decides to start hacking humans, and then we start having to now hack humans. All right, and there's a theory of mine of that, but we'll get into that a little next episode where we get into the superficial theories. But there's a theory on that, but that now becomes a different thing, which might be its own thing, right?
Right.
And whether that be nanotech inside your body that controls your body, and then hackers have to control that, or you put in microchips like some people we know, just random ass chips in
Right.
your
Right.
body, But when you start hacking humans, that brings another element to that. So, um, again, as far as I'm concerned, AppSec will always be a big thing now, because everything is apps,
Yeah.
everything is an application.
Even networks.
Right, right. It's becoming software. It's software defined.
Mm-hmm.
But they're moving to that area, and then especially with COVID,
Right.
everything's virtual, everything's application based. Like, I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening in the world, but like I say, AppSec is a big part of that, and we're gonna keep seeing a decline in information security. And I have to say this before we actually end the show, whenever that is. But I have to say that that it's going to always be a lack, because there's not a lot of good quality
Right.
individuals in the field, but
I
there's
agree.
also a lack of different diversity in the field.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, diversity and different cultures bring different mindsets, different experiences, and that's what makes it great. Just like we had and talked about before. The way China hacks is a lot different. And we're not going to go there. I know your thoughts on that, but where the way China hacks is different than the way Russia hacks, and the way they think.
Right.
They bring a different mindset.
Right. Right.
And they're totally different cultures, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if you consider Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So having that diversity brings that different mindset, different cultures, different ways that things are being done. So you can learn from that, and then bring that and help each other stop these APTs and these different attackers from,
Marketing.
taking over the network or taking over your company.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Diversity is incredibly important, and unfortunately, I think people are generally going about it all the wrong way. And that's across all fields, but that includes security. You really have to have a diversity of thought. And until that occurs, I think we'll have a problem. And you're also right. This problem will continue to exist, honestly, probably ad infinitum, this dearth of security professionals. And there's a reason for it. As more and more stuff moves to technology professionals are becoming more and more vital. And they are becoming, when you need a lot of professionals, I mean, we have how many different cell phones? I don't know what the cell phone to human ratio is, but I know it's high. And applications, there are tons of different applications. There are tons of different, we almost maxed out the IP version 4 address space, for Pete's sake. Now, granted, something people don't talk about is that large swaths of that are reserved. But ignoring that, the more we press into this whole Internet of Things, each one of those components needs to be secured. And there are too many pieces of technology, too many applications floating around, and far too few humans, far too few professionals, and it just gets worse from here. So I don't know how that's going to be handled in the future, other than through automation. But as we discussed, the automation's so bad, and it has been bad for a very, very long time. And it really hasn't improved. Not in any meaningful way.
Agreed.
But
yeah, I agree.
Anyway, so let's go through. I would like to end this actually. If you would do everyone a kindness, I love the logo.
Yeah.
Would you take us through the mind of the man who helped, actually the man who piloted, and with the aid of, I believe, your sister, and
yes,
created.
She's brilliant, very creative. But the whole idea, as you know, we were talking about this whole, the logo and this whole idea is you have, and if anybody watched Solar Opposites, you kind of see it has that Futurama or Solar Opposites type of thing to it, but it's a really good background to it, and I find it silly, but it's a really good background. Like, you're what, Native American and Mexican and all these different races inside, right? And I don't know how many things I am, but I know that one, I'm considered African American, right? I have some Native American in me. I have some, everything, some of everything. But the whole part of an alien, and those are aliens, whether people think it or not, is that we are always alienized by our color. If we're not Pacific race, we're not Caucasian or something like that, then we're not dominant. And we are alienated from the rest of the world, and especially in our field. Okay, it doesn't matter what field it is, and whether it's security, it could be counseling, it could be social work, whatever that is. You're alienated by your color and your race. So that whole idea was to show that that we're alienated by our race and our color and our culture. And then you have one you have an alien who has dreads with an African and please,
that's
I don't
clearly
know
me.
as much. Huh?
That's clearly me.
Yeah.
Obviously, that was me. You modeled that off of me. I mean.
Oh yeah, you have the dreads and everything. Right?
I got the whole look.
You have the African garment and everything.
That's right.
And they stereotype that, right?
Right.
So clearly, I've never ever stepped foot in Africa, but I am an African.
Right.
And I don't say that I don't have heritage from Africa, but I am. If I went to Africa or claimed that I was an African, a true African, I would be. They would look at me totally the other way.
Oh yeah.
I am not by any means a true African, but I am an African American because of my descendants. But again, that's what I'm stereotyping. I'm an alien who's alienized. I don't belong here, and I'm also an African. All right, that also does not belong here, and it's not a superior race. All right, so every time somebody looks at me, they look at me as usual. He's an African. He's a thug. He's a ghetto. Like, it does not matter. Like, it does not matter what I look like. I am just stereotyped from the beginning. All right, and if you go to yourself, you're Mexican, Native American. Now, I could have actually added some Native American stuff, but I thought that might even bring some really, really big confusion and issues between the two. But you basically, when people look at you, Nate, and we talked about this, there could be many different ways they look at you, and a lot of it was like if you were Arabic, like if you were from Iran. But really, if they really know, you could stereotype, oh, he's a Mexican, or he's from Iran, he's from whatever, he's crazy, whatever. They stereotype you straight off the back.
Yeah.
And you had that issue even with the different companies that we were at, that by your color, by who you are, your race, your culture, you don't know anything. Who are you? Like, you shouldn't even be here. Bye. Excuse me. And they're ignorant to that. They're ignorant to the fact, treat you like, the same thing. You're an alien. All right. And this whole idea represents two people from different cultures and are truly diverse that love what they do.
Yes.
and can actually speak um, from experience. Okay. And the fact that there's not a lot of diversity in there because we're alienated, that brings a lack of different cultures, different mindsets, and everything to any different industry. So that's what this kind of logo defines, is that it doesn't matter your race. It doesn't matter who you are, what color you are, whether you're yellow, black, brown, purple. I don't care what it is, rainbow, whatever. It does not matter who you are. We all belong. We all have something to give to this world, this industry, and that's what our logo kind of defines. And this whole podcast also talks about different experiences, so people can understand where we're coming from in different ways. Because most podcasts do not discuss these things. It's always one-sided.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about the real issues and the dark side that you see of these industries and different things. And then on this podcast, we're not only talking about security. It could be martial art. It can be anything. There's diversity issues in each areas, and we'll be discussing that. But that's kind of what I wanted out of it. I didn't really want to. I didn't want us to kind of ruffle too many feathers. But as we talked before, if you're not ruffling some feathers, you're not doing something right. All right. You gotta ruffle some feathers, and that's the point of being in security. One, you're gonna ruffle feathers, and if you have a problem and you're scared to do that, then you probably don't really belong here.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
You gotta ruffle some feathers. So it may make some people butthurt about this whole idea, but it's the truth. And I wanted to bring that to life about our podcast. That we're two different races, two different cultures. And very diverse, and we bring a lot to our field. So
it's funny to me. I really, really enjoyed it. I really liked it, especially as you started to explain and talk about it. I mean, when I first saw it, I was like, "Is he trying to get me lynched?"
Yeah, it was like, excuse me, this is not going to be good. We're going to get in trouble, right? And I'm like, but there's a meaning behind this.
There is, and it's actually really beautiful. I mean, now. The levels that it works on is stunning to me, because as you talked about, so we're both aliens. We're aliens in this land, which is interesting because, of course, many of your ancestors were brought here, right? And then on my side, many of my ancestors were already here. So to be an alien on this was our place first kind of deal is kind of weird and ironic. And I have that Mexican Native American and that United States Native American. That's not how that worked, but that's how the U.S. thinks of it. And so does my wife, so do our children. And it's funny because down south in the Southwest, they all look at me and they're like, "Oh, it's he's one of ours." But when I'm up here in anywhere other than the Southwest, a lot of people do look at me and they think, "Oh, well, not he's mestizo." They think, "Oh, he's Arab, he's Turkish, he's Persian, he's Saudi, he's something like that." So I become an alien in what is rightfully my own land, which is weird. Not that it's just so funny to me. It's funny. It's weird, and we get treated by ignorant people so differently, and it's very wrong. It's unfortunate because it shows how simple-minded some people are, and they want consistency of thought. And your experiences and my experiences in life are very different, and you have a different perspective as a result of those experiences, but they bring together a good flavor. And I think a lot of that is what's missing by having a unicultural security field. And that's what we have right now. Security is unicultural. And honestly, they're doggedly so. I mean, this one guy sat there and he one day told me, he called me a white hat, and I got mad. And I said, "I'm not a white hat. Don't ever call me a white hat." He said, "Well, that's what we're paying you to be." I said, "No one's paying me to be a white hat." But that goes to it's a unicultural movement. They demand everyone think a certain way, have a certain set of experiences, and that will only continue to harm us. And until we have that diversity of thought, diversity of experience and skill set knowledge, I don't know what we have, but it's a travesty.
So with that being said, let me ask you this question, and I'm only saying this from my perspective because you know me. Um, as I told you, there's been that eyeballed out, and it probably you haven't got that as much. I know we had talked about this, but it's more that I got this eyeballed out that I am treated differently because of my thought process. And I don't know why. Like now, you have the color of the skin, but then if we get past the color of the skin, say you don't even know what I am, like what color I am. We're remote, we're virtually and remote, but because I have a different mindset, I'm not a white hat. I'm right along there with you. I'm not a white hat, so I don't think like they do. I think way outside of that realm. But because I'm like the oddball out, why? I don't understand why I'm being treated like that. And I'm only trying to better not only my team, but also the client. Like we said, you know me. I like to find things that nobody's looking for. I like to be very creative, and I have called you on a bunch of different incidents or things where I'm like, I don't know what the hell this is, but I found this, and you're like, yeah, what? You're funny, and I don't even know what I found, what I have, but there'd be some really interesting things, and nobody can explain it, but you will know. And I don't understand why I get treated that way because it's like you don't know my color,
Yeah.
you don't know who I am, you probably never took the time to know me, but because of my mindset, I am also separated from the group.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And it's a terrible thing, and unfortunately that perspective is killing our industry. It is hampering our capabilities, and it will continue to do so. And until people are more open-minded, we will continue to suffer. And I think that's in line with everything else that we've said today. So it is unfortunate, but I think all of this stuff goes hand in hand. Hey, it's been fantastic talking with you. I've had a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to next time.
Yeah, this was very fun. And until the next time, I am Roniel.
And I am DaRon.
And thank you guys for watching the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. See you until the next time.
Have fun.